takes them to heaven. Therefore, they don't have to personally suffer. Although they believe that Christ's sacrifice on the cross was not sufficient, its alleged repetition in the Mass, if done enough times, will eventually get one to heaven. Moreover, good Catholics may offer their own sufferings to release souls from purgatory. Padre Pio, recently deceased and made a saint by John Paul II, manifested the stigmata, that is, bleeding from the hands and feet and side, for 40 years to pay the penalty for the sins of the world, so that souls could be released from purgatory. Of such alleged saints, Vatican II says, quote, "They have carried their crosses to make expiation for their own sins and for the sins of others. They were convinced that by their suffering they could help their brothers to obtain salvation from God." Unquote. Again, we see the fatal denial of the sufficiency of Christ's sacrifice on the cross. For centuries, the payment of money was to have brought deliverance from purgatory. That practice eventually troubled Martin Luther's conscience and sparked the Reformation. Who can forget the infamous sales pitch of the Dominican friar Tetzel, commissioned by Pope Leo X to reap a fortune for Rome? Quote, "As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs." Unquote. With such fraudulently obtained money, St. Peter's Cathedral was built and repaired. This was nothing new. Rome had consistently sold salvation for centuries. Popes published lists of every crime from incest to piracy to murder, and the price for which the Church would give absolution for each. For example, a deacon guilty of murder could be absolved for 20 crowns. The anointed malefactors, as they were called, once pardoned by the Church, could not be prosecuted by civil authorities because the Church reigned supreme. Here's a further abomination, filling the woman's cup, selling tickets to heaven that actually send people to hell. Similar practices continue in Roman Catholicism to this day. This is a Mass card obtainable from any mortuary. Fill in your name and the name of the deceased. In exchange for an offering, the priest will place the card on the altar when he says Mass, allegedly reducing the time of suffering for the deceased in purgatory. Of course, the Church makes no guarantee as to how much the suffering will be shortened, nor how many more Masses must be said before the gates of heaven can be opened. Consequently, multiple Masses are purchased in the hope that eventually there will be enough. A friend told me that at his father's funeral more than $2,000 in Mass cards were purchased. Vatican II declares, "The Church teaches and commands that the usage of indulgences, such as Mass cards, a usage most beneficial to Christians and approved by the authority of the sacred councils, should be kept in the Church. And it condemns with anathema those who say that indulgences are useless or that the Church does not have the power to grant them." Some Catholics claim they don't believe in purgatory and indulgences, regardless of what the Church says. But if they don't fear their Church's anathemas condemning them to hell, why do they still trust her promises to get them to heaven? There are 20 complex rules governing indulgences. Rule 17 explains that the use of a crucifix, rosary, scapular, or medal can gain a partial indulgence. But if this object of piety is blessed by the Pope or any bishop, the faithful who use it with devotion can also gain a plenary, that is, a full indulgence, on the feast of the Apostles Peter and Paul. Here's another abomination, filling that gold chalice. What kind of God grants special favors to those who possess a scapular or medal blessed by a priest or bishop and used on a feast day of Peter or Paul? Keep in mind that the Catholic Church is saying that these objects have power to provide what Christ's sufferings on the cross could not. Speaking of abominations, the woman is called, quote, "the mother of harlots, unquote. In addition to spiritual harlots, Roman Catholicism has created literal harlots by the millions. Innumerable celibate priests, bishops, cardinals, and popes throughout history have had their lovers. There were popes who were the sons of supposedly celibate popes. Pope Silverius was fathered by Pope Hormisdas, and John XI by Sergius III. The list of bastards who ruled the Church includes Popes Boniface I, Gelasius, Agapetus, Theodore, Adrian IV, and others. No wonder Pope Pius II, who himself fathered illegitimate children, said that Rome was, quote, the only city run by bastards, unquote. For centuries, it was a favorite joke that Rome had more prostitutes than any other city because she had the most celibates. The sexual exploits of supposedly celibate priests and nuns, once hushed up, are increasingly being brought to light. Homosexual priests are dying of AIDS worldwide, with estimates that as many as 70% of priests in some seminaries are practicing homosexuals. The Roman Catholic Church in America has paid out an estimated $1 billion in the past few years in out-of-court settlements to conceal sexual abuse among the clergy. I have a file more than 2 inches thick, filled with news articles involving sexual immorality of Roman Catholic clergy just within the past 5 years. It's not that Catholic priests and nuns are any more lustful than the average person. They may have started out with higher ideals, but they have had imposed upon them the unbiblical rule of celibacy, which becomes a burden too great to bear. The woman in Revelation is also drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. For centuries, to disobey the popes was heresy punishable by death. J.H. Ignaz von Dollinger, a leading 19th century Catholic professor of church history, confessed, quote, since 1183, the view of the church had been that every departure from the teaching of the church must be punished with death, and the most cruel of deaths by fire, unquote. For 1,000 years before the Reformation, there were Christians who refused to give allegiance to Rome and who were slaughtered by the millions. Everyone knows of the Crusades to retake the Holy Land, but few know that even larger and more numerous crusades were fought in an attempt to exterminate Christians all over Europe, who, out of conscience to God and obedience to the Bible, would not submit to the authority of the popes or embrace Rome's heresies. Of these martyrs, historian Will Durant wrote, quote, the Roman Church, they were sure, was the whore of Babylon, unquote. Such was the opinion of the Reformers, written into the Reformation creeds. One could hardly come to any other conclusion from John's vision, yet that opinion is being abandoned and even ridiculed by evangelicals in the interests of ecumenism. The popes promised instantaneous entrance into heaven for those who gave their lives slaughtering the heretics. It took about a century to exterminate the Albigensian Christians, who at one time were the majority of the population of southern France. Among the cities wiped out by Pope Innocent III was Béziers, France. 60,000 massacred there, including women and children. In the infamous St. Bartholomew's Massacre in August 1572, 70,000 Huguenots were killed. Another 200,000 were slaughtered over a period of months, causing 500,000 to flee to Protestant countries for refuge. The Valdenses were all but exterminated, as were the Hussites. Here is an excerpt from Pope Martin V's letter to the King of Poland in 1429, 100 years before the Reformation. Know that the interests of the Holy See and those of your crown make it a duty to exterminate the Hussites. Remember that these impious persons dare proclaim principles of equality, that all Christians are brethren, that Christ came on earth to abolish slavery. They call the people to liberty. While there is still time, then turn your forces against